I know that Bob believed that there was no afterlife. He believed that you only live on in the hearts and minds of the people that you touch. And even knowing that, approaching his death without fear, he had every reason to be satisfied with what he left behind. I don't believe that that's true. I believe that we will see Bob again. But if the only thing that we ever leave is the essence of ourselves, in those that we have touched, he has left behind an enormous gift, an enormous blessing for all of us. Working with him made you a better actor, and knowing him made you a better person. And I'll miss him and never ever forget him. Because that's all I have to say.
I worked with Bob in his first incarnation as Scrooge, and of course I was 3 years old. And also his last one, and he's, as Murray said, I guess the definitive Scrooge in my mind, just working with him. And every time I watch another film version, I always compare it with it's not Bob Pinney. Because he was just my Scrooge. And so he will forever live on in my heart, just every Christmas time when I watch any kind of version, whether it's Mr. Magoo or George C. Scott. And I like Bob's performance better than his. But he'll always be Scrooge in my mind.
I first met Bob in 2001 when I came to Colorado Springs to play Helena in a production of All's Well That Ends Well, where he played the King of France. And I instantly fell in love with Bob. I completely adored him, and still do. But we took this production on tour in the tent. And there was one performance that we did. They had pitched the tent very close to horse stables. And those of you in the audience who are in that show remember that with horses come flies. And we all gesticulated a little more than usual during that performance. But there was one scene with Bob where it was just the two of us on stage. And there was this one fly that was very persistent. And, Bob with his magnificent hands could not get this fly to leave us alone. And I was kneeling in front of Bob, and he had quite a lengthy speech to me. And he's speaking, and I see this fly go into his mouth. And Bob's eyes just got a little bit bigger. And, I know my mouth fell open. And he just kept talking. And I thought, is he swallowed it? Where is this fly? And I suppose because Bob's articulation was so fantastic that this fly was getting beaten to death. But just as Bob was finishing, the fly flew right back out. And then it left us alone. And after the show, I was astounded that Bob had just kept going. I was like, oh my God, how did you do that? And when that fly went in your mouth, he just looked at me and said, I will never be upstage. That's my dearest performance memory of Bob Pinney. And the last time I saw Bob was last summer when I was here, and Bob and I had a lunch date. And everyone had told me that he was very, very ill. But when he came to pick me up for my lunch date, there was no indication at all, except that he was a bit slimmer, that he was very, very ill. He was in such great form. And he insisted on picking me up. We gentleman. And I, because I was staying in digs, I didn't know the house number, and I was staying kind of around the back, so I said, well, I don't really know where I am, so why don't I meet you on the closest Main Street corner, which is Cascade and Monument. So I'm out there waiting for Bob to come and pick me up, and he pulls up, and he leans over, and he opens the door, and he looks at me and says, going my way? And I think any way that Bob was going was a good way to be going. And I will always love and adore him. And I'm very, very grateful that I got to know him and that I got to work with him.
It turns out that my entire career here at TheatreWorks began with a recommendation from Bob and Chris, who had seen me in a play. Because then Murray called me and said, would you like to audition for All's Well That Ends Well? Who's Murray Ross? Sure. One of the most amazing things, though, was, so that's obviously the first time that I worked with Bob, was that summer. And he certainly didn't know me. He knew so many other people so much better. Well, Tom. It was, it would have been a night or two before we opened. And I wasn't really aware too much of the history of Bob Pinney at that point in time. My understanding was that he had already died before, and that he had come back to life. He had some kind of major heart surgery that I was sort of barely aware of. And for some reason, I don't know why he chose that time, or he chose me, or whatever, we're waiting to go on for a particular scene, and I suddenly feel his hands on me, and he's shaking. And I turn and I go, what's going on? What's wrong? Are you okay? And he just looked at me and he said, I'm scared. And I didn't know why he was scared, because I had heard and I knew about Bob, about how long he'd been here, and I obviously knew how long he'd been doing theater and stuff. And so I got him to sit down, and we always had a chair right off stage for him, you know, because this was his first major role since having had his heart attack. I believe it was 2 years earlier. And he just said that 2 years was a long time, and he wasn't sure what he could do. And I'm the new guy. So, well, I've been watching you, and you do everything. You know, I mean, I don't even know why he'd be scared. And he just thanked me, and he went out, and he, you know, blew me off the stage. So I just thought that was very interesting that he would choose this person he barely knew in this moment that he needed somebody. And I was lucky enough to be in King Lear with him and watch that tremendous performance. But he fell ill again for a while there, about 4 or 5 years ago, and when he came back out of that, I asked him to start working for Star Wars, which he had helped start years and years earlier. And he did. And he came and he did Painting Churches for us, where he played a man who was slowly losing his faculties. And I have never, ever in my life seen somebody play, I know he was, obviously I know he was acting, play at being so lost in a moment. I've never seen anything like it. He would have this moment on stage where he would lose sight of everything in his life and just stand there. And every night the audience would get as quiet as any audience I've ever heard in my life. Because one of the great things about Bob, to me, when he was on a roll, was even though I knew what was coming next, I didn't know what was coming next. And that's pretty special. You know, when he's got you so involved. I was lucky enough to do the very last job he ever did. He did that for me. That was on Night in Her Stars. The final play of the scene we chose to film. That was a choice we made before speaking